Hi, Kevin Ledoux, the Pragmatic Luthier. I'm back again today with part two in my series, Making Your Own Jigs and Fixtures. Uh, I want to speak to those people who might be new to my channel and new to me. Just a little bit of background for those that are not familiar. Uh, I believe in making all of the tools, jigs, fixtures, templates, assembly aids, whatever you need yourself, as many as you can. And I believe that because I know for a fact that it strengthens you as a maker, a crafts person, because it challenges your creativity. It causes you to focus in specifically on the problem or problems that you need to solve in order to make these tools, or the problems that you need to solve, and therefore why you're making these tools. I think it's all a very good thing. Uh, at the same time, I sort of hold a jaundiced eye to pre-made tooling, because sometimes while it's necessary and sometimes while it's efficient or it's spot on in its ability to solve problems for you, quite often it isn't. And invariably, if it's a device that requires parts and pieces or additional components, now you're stuck with this supplier. You have this relationship between you and them. You're beholden to them to buy these things if you're going to make this thing work or to continue to work for you. And I disapprove of that simply because I am frugal and I would rather engineer my own solutions. So having said that, let's get down to the real subject matter of today's presentation and monologue. What I want to do is get a little bit philosophical, and I hope not to be overly vociferous about this, as I frequently can be. Uh, but I also believe that knowing a single fact may be handy, but getting the context around that fact or series of facts is much more powerful, because it allows you to more easily contemplate and manipulate and use that information to your advantage. So there's going to be a little bit of a philosophy lesson today, if you don't mind, but don't worry. It's a lesson, I guess, but there's no tests and there's no quizzes or anything like that. So not to worry. So let's start with some simple definitions. Because I think these terms get kind of thrown around a little bit, and it might be a good idea to just clarify. Uh, a jig is a device that holds a workpiece and guides a tool. And I'll show some quick examples of this right after we view this page a little bit. A fixture, on the other hand, locates or registers a workpiece, for example, in a milling machine, or maybe in a jig that you've made. It's also a fixture because you're locating your workpiece in it. Um, Templates are, of course, anything that you would use as a pattern or use for repetitive tracing or positioning or locating. Uh, Pretty simple to understand. I don't think there's need for a lot of explanation there. So let's take a look at just a couple of quick examples in case you're kind of scratching your head a little bit. So here's an example of a jig. This device is used to mill this mortise in guitar heel blocks. It's a simple enough device. It holds a workpiece in here. The heel block goes in here, is clamped into position, and then the top side here guides a router bit with a bearing in it, and it reads that shape and cuts it in the heel block. So there's a really good example of a jig, and a pretty precise one too. Here's another one. And I know some of you have seen some of these before. I've featured them in other videos and things, but just recapping for purposes of explanation here today. Here's another jig for creating this slot in a bridge saddle slot in a guitar bridge. Now, this is very specific also, because this is for one style of bridge only. I make 3 or 4 different styles of bridges, but they're not all applicable to this tool. So this is made so that I can rotate to get the angle I need. It's on a block so that I can mount this in a milling machine or in a drill press if necessary. And I can register the bridge between these two adjustable washers right here. I can trap the bridge in there and then clamp it down. So there's another good example of a jig. And you might even call it a fixture because it registers a workpiece. What about templates? Well, here's a template. It's a half body template. And these are easy enough to understand. This is very simple, but you may have seen these in other videos from other guitar makers where they've got a large piece of polymer of some kind, possibly, or acrylic, and they've got slots cut in it to show them where to position braces and all that sort of thing. Very, very consistent, very, very repeatable. Here's, I guess you'd classify this as a jig, but it's also an assembly aid. You might even see where it's sort of a template. This device locks onto the fingerboard of a guitar neck, and these two pins grab onto a bridge like so. And this hits the end of the fingerboard, this end up here, and it positions the bridge exactly where it needs to be. And these adjustment screws here allow you to turn it back and forth until you have this center line aligned with the center line of the neck. This is extremely specific. This is only for a right-handed guitar. It is only for a 25.4-inch scale, but it's a handy assembly aid. Possibly you would call that a jig too. Here's an assembly, or not an assembly aid, but a gauging tool. This allows me to measure my neck angle that I need to make for every body. By positioning this over a body, I can adjust it to read the angle between the heel of the guitar and the top, and then repeat that in other jigs going forward. Other templates, these are headpiece templates. Now, I'm doing a lot of this because we'll circle around again a little bit later, but these templates are for different headpieces. I make several different headpieces, not just for acoustic bass and 12-string and classical and so on, but as my guitar bodies get smaller, I scale down the headpiece ever so slightly. And of course, conversely, if they get larger. There's nothing worse than looking at a large body guitar with a small headpiece on it. It's just so misplaced. And conversely, looking at a small guitar and it's got this big headpiece on it, it looks like a jazz guitar. So these can be used to trace onto the headpiece of the neck blank. They can also be used as router templates by double face taping these down in the correct position. I can use the outer perimeter as a template to guide a flush trim bit, and I can route the shape of the headpiece to its finished size. So there we have some examples of jigs, fixtures, and templates. So let's take a look at what jigs and fixtures do, because some of it you may not have considered or you may not expect. Jigs and fixtures predetermine a specified result of an operation. That's pretty easy to understand. The jig I showed you for making these heel blocks makes this cut, and it makes that cut that way, the same way, every single time I operate it. They eliminate the influence or control by the operant. So that means it doesn't matter who I have operate this jig to make this cut, it's going to come out the same. I'm an experienced woodworker, but I could have an inexperienced woodworker do the same thing and I'd get the same results. Which brings us to the next point. They can be operated by unskilled workers, and there's the foundation of jigs and fixtures and manufacturing and assembly lines and the Henry Ford deal and the whole thing that we're relatively familiar with. You don't need skilled craftspeople and you don't need engineers at every workstation. By predetermining results, you can get unskilled people to actually carry on the work. And of course, because they produce the same results over and over again, um, they increase production speed and efficiency. They reduce the cost of production. In increasing speed and efficiency, they reduce that cost. And we can follow that, of course, all the way through to less time spent and fewer employees needed, or less expensive employees and greater profits. And I'm sure you can go down that rabbit hole easily all by yourself. You don't need me to take you down there. But one of the other things that they do is they create a consistency that is tantamount to vapidity. And that's an important part to contemplate. And within this series of statements, there are some questions that you might want to ask. And so now I'd like to tell you the story of diversity. The works of nature are reflected in the works of man. Those words were written by David Pye, I believe, in around 1968. And that's a very, very important statement. And it begs the questions that you see here. When and where do you need consistency and repeatability? And how much precision do you need? Those are the big questions. I have the camera positioned just 5 feet from that guitar body. And from this distance, you can see that the top is wood, and of course your memory, or what you would expect to see in this context, tells you that it's wood. But you don't see much character in it at this point. But I'd like you to also focus on the rosette. You can see that it's black, there's something in it, and much beyond that, you probably can't tell. But as we move closer, now you can see that the rosette is black, it has contrasting rings, and there are leaves around it. And there's where the story of diversity begins, because we have both consistency and diversity found in the same place. So I took a great deal of time and effort using jigs and fixtures to make sure that every one of those components of that black material are consistent and exactly the same, so that they all fit together and formed a nice perfect circle. I did the same thing with the border material inside and outside the rosette, making sure with jigs and fixtures that I reached the level of precision that I was after, and that I got the predetermined shape and size and consistency of circle that I was after. But look at the flowers, look at the leaves. You can see that they're leaves. And you can also see that those leaves are all of the same species, whatever species that happens to be. And you know that they're all alike because they're all the same species. But there's where the diversity is. David Pye said also, when he talked about diversity, he said, you would recognize a maple leaf anywhere, but you know very well that no two leaves on a maple tree are exactly the same. There's diversity, the diversity reflected in nature. So as we move back, we can see that there's something interesting in the rosette. As we move closer, we can see that there are leaves, and they appear to be possibly all alike, because we know that all leaves are, at first glance, all alike. But as we move closer and take another look, you can see that no two leaves are alike at all. They're not alike in their actual shape, and they're not alike in the veining that appears in them. But they still look enough alike so that we can look at them and say, oh yeah, those are all whatever kind of leaves they happen to be. And that diversity is something that jigs and fixtures can, and all too often do, take away from us. Wood itself is a very diverse material. I think we all know that. But think about it very carefully. Contemplate it for a second. At this distance from the guitar, you see its color. It suggests figure. If it was not as figured, you wouldn't see really much of anything beyond color and some shades. But as we get closer and closer, and we observe the finer details in that, look at the diversity in that. Look at the variation that nature presents. Even in something as small as a piece of binding, by selecting the grain in something that small, you can change the way it looks from different distances, and it becomes pleasing. This is the stuff of our aesthetic environment, and it's important that we consider that all the time. You cannot paint American Gothic with jigs and fixtures, paint by number, or even CNC equipment. So I'm stopping here for today because I don't want to be overly vociferous with this, but mostly I want to tantalize you to come back and watch the next chapter in this series. Today, I hope you'll contemplate some of the questions that I've raised and some of the things that I've pointed out about the nature of jigs and fixtures. I'm Kevin Ledoux, the pragmatic Luther at Ledoux Guitars, and I'm also a bit of a philosopher. Thank you for watching.